I'm Rob Dansman, and this is The Better Semester, where I provide insight and actionable advice to parents of college students. I'm a nationally certified counselor and licensed clinical mental health counselor, specializing in work with college students and their parents to improve mental health, organization, and motivation. All right, hey everyone, welcome back. I have today Margo Shine. She is owner of Shine Educational Consulting. Without further ado, Margo, welcome.
Hi.
I'd love to hear a little bit about who you are and what you do, and we'll jump in from there.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. This is really exciting. I'm excited to talk just about what we do because I think it's interesting and I hope everybody else finds it interesting. We'll see. But yeah, my name is Margo Shine and I own Shine Educational Consulting here in Bloomington, Indiana. I am a trained school psychologist and board certified behavior analyst. And I spend my days working with students through high school and college level, working on what we call executive functioning skills, but working on just general academic skills and how to be a better student and to meet their educational goals. That is the bulk of what I do, but I work with families and schools to support those students and to work toward their goals as a complete system and a complete team. And I've been doing this work now for about 3 years. I've had my own business. So before that, though, I worked in the public school setting as both a school psychologist and a behavior specialist.
Can you talk a little bit about your credentials? So,
Sure.
what does behavioral analyst mean, and what does it mean to be a psychologist? And like
Yeah.
the training and education along with both of those things.
Yeah. I'll start. My first path was in school psychology. So, as a school psychologist, I went to graduate school for 3 years to get what's called an educational specialist degree. And so, through those 3 years, I learned how to provide what's called psychoeducational testing. That looks at like students' academic levels, cognitive skills. We'd give IQ tests, as they're commonly known, and my main role as a school psychologist within the public education setting was to provide those evaluations to see if students qualified for special education service. So that was the bulk of my role, and to work with students, families, and school teams on providing that intervention given my results from testing. So that's basically the role of a school psychologist. They do so much more in the public education setting than just testing. Unfortunately, though, that's how the money gets made. So that is really like why we're federally mandated to be in schools and providing that testing. But we do interventions, we provide counseling, we provide teacher education around how to support students of varying abilities. It's really a broad role and really depends on what state you live in and just the district you end up in as well. So I've worked in two different states. I worked in Washington, where I'm from. I'm from Seattle originally. And so I went to graduate school in Seattle and started my career there. And then moved to Indiana in 2019 and also worked here as both a behavior specialist and school psychologist. So that's the school psychology realm. It can be specific to schools, but also there's a PhD level. I'm an educational specialist, so I was trained to work in schools. Um, but there are many PhD school psychologists who work in the private sector as well, in so many different settings, behavioral health settings. So there are a lot of us out there as well that do different things in the psychology world. And then as a board certified behavior analyst, honestly, it's kind of a left turn really out of psychology. So as a behaviorist, you are trained in how to, employ behavioral strategies to help students learn new skills, replace certain behaviors that are non-adaptive. And the bulk of that was 2 years of coursework and then a big test, big hefty test to become board certified. And many BCBAs work in applied behavior analysis. So they work typically with children with autism. It's the main kind of avenue that most BCBAs go down, and they provide applied behavior analysis, ABA for short. There's so many acronyms in our field. It's insane. So I'll try to do my best to spell out what that is. They work in clinics providing behavior analysis and services to students, kids with autism. My work though was school specific, so I went down that route just to learn more and be able to employ behavioral techniques within the school setting and with the students that I work with.
How did you choose your undergrad major? What was your undergrad major? How'd you choose that, and how did you decide to uh, pursue school psychology, and then make the pivot towards education consulting? Um,
Yeah, is a windy road. So as an undergrad, I entered my freshman year. I went to Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. Go Zags! I entered in as an international relations major. Totally different. I have always loved languages and took Spanish and Japanese, and I traveled to Japan in high school. And so I was like, I want to do something in international relations. And then I took one college level Spanish course and I said, never mind, this is not for me. So I pivoted and taking one thing I really loved about Gonzaga was that they have a really hefty core component. So the first 2 years really of your freshman and sophomore year are really spent completing that core. And so you are required to take a variety of classes, like just to kind of, I think it really helped me explore like different subjects I had not considered, psychology being one of them. So
so
I had
true.
taken,
So it is a true liberal arts program.
yes, yes. Which there were some, I had done my international baccalaureate diploma in high school and was a little bummed to get to college and not really like, that didn't really carry me very far, which it can with different schools. But overall, I really appreciated that time to really explore in my first 2 years because, like I said, I entered it thinking one thing and then was quickly like, oh, that's not going to happen. So, yeah, so I had taken a Psych 101 course and absolutely thought it was fascinating, loved it. I really remember so vividly my professor talking about her own career path into academia and saying, really, like, a lot of people love psychology. And if you love it, you're going to have to go to grad school. So, really prepare yourself for that. And so I remember thinking then I was like, okay, if I choose this, I know I'm signing up for more school, which I love being a student. So that wasn't an issue for me. I feel like it really fit my temperament, but that was definitely something that was helpful, I think, to be have up front filled out for me. So I just kind of followed that path. I thought working with people would be really interesting. And I also found sociology really interesting. So I double majored in psychology and sociology. And then um, that was basically my undergraduate experience. Having been to Japan in high school, I had always known through the program I did when I was 16, I spent a summer there. Um, I had worked with people who had been part of something called the JET program, which is a program funded by the Japanese government to have native English speakers come and teach English for 1 to 5 years, college graduates. So I had known that was kind of something I had had in my mind that between my undergraduate and graduate kind of school, I wanted to take a gap year or a gap 2 years. I wasn't sure how many years it would be. It ended up being two, but so I taught abroad for 2 years in a super rural town in Japan, and that's where the educational component came in. So I worked in schools. I was an English teacher. I worked in nursery schools with kids that were like 3 years old, all the way through elementary. And I just loved the school environment. I loved like the pace of school. I loved just yeah, I loved how it was like throughout the year, there were certain rhythms, we were doing certain things, and it was really just a fun place to be. And I just loved it. And I love being around kids. I've always babysat, I've been a nanny, I was a nanny in college. Like I just really enjoy spending time with kids and just I just find them hilarious and interesting. And so I think being in a school really cemented for me, like, oh, I feel really at home here, but teaching is not my jam. So finding something adjacent, and that was part of the school system, but wasn't necessarily the routine of the classroom, or didn't have the same demands of the classroom, really interested me. So honestly, Google searching, how can I do psychology in the school psychologist came up. So that's basically how I started applying to programs as a school psychologist. Yeah, and then I moved back to Seattle, started my grad program, and that basically led me into my job in school. Becoming a BCBA was a left turn based on when I moved to Bloomington in 2019. I looked for school psychology jobs, which is funny because in graduate school they promise you there are a million of them out there. And in certain parts of the country, that's true, but it's not true everywhere. And IU has a great school psych program, so they have a lot of graduates that move into jobs that local to Bloomington. So I decided to pivot and apply for a behavior specialist job with just my school psychologist training, which we do have a bit of background in how to support students with behavioral challenges. So I kind of got into it, but realized, man, my colleagues were all BCBAs, all behavior analysts. And so I was like, wow, they have a depth of knowledge I don't. And so I was really like uh, encouraged to take further coursework and really dive into that behavioral world, because of just watching them and how they would design behavioral interventions. They were just like, they just, again, had this depth of knowledge. I was like, wow, I wouldn't even know where to start on that, working on that problem. So that's why I started doing coursework to become a BCBA, was working with students with really severe behavioral challenges. And I just found it to be like a really interesting and really just effective way to work with those students who had the highest needs. And so that's how I basically got my BCBA. And honestly, the thread line through all of that that led me to where I am now, which is not in the school system, is in my work in schools, I always felt like there was never enough time. Um, Never enough time to really support a student as much as they needed, to give to my school team as much as they wanted, or to really support parents as much as they needed. And so, going through COVID, which I feel like was a transformational experience for so many people, being home and kind of pulled out of that setting, I had a lot of time to think about like what else could I do that gave me that time, flexibility, and autonomy to like really do what I feel like I'm good at and to really support people in the way that feels good for them and supportive to them and actually makes change. And so that's where I started my own business. LLC was started then, and then it kind of hit the ground running, and I've kind of wiggled my way into different roles, but academic coach and educational consultant has been the best fit so far.
It, my work with students, I often talk about when majors or careers come up. One of the models that I give students, I want them to aim for an intersection of ability, interest, and compensation. That's like a sweet spot of a very satisfying life, in many of the life domains.
Mm.
And it sounds like you, through kind of your path, like you got closer and closer and closer. And it
Yeah,
sounds like this entrepreneurship. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like it doesn't sound like entrepreneurship. Like starting your own business was on the radar years ago.
no,
It
definitely not.
right. It was almost like it was out of utility, that it popped up.
Yeah.
Um, But
Absolutely. I think too, to your point, it was a lot of trial and error on my part, like in terms of like, I think most, if not all careers have pros and cons. And I think, as somebody who is growing and constantly developing that skill of self-reflection and understanding my own temperament and what really best fit me and what didn't. I think that I developed that sense through a lot of trial and error in my own career path. And I think that is important, but it's not always necessary. Like, I think if you are able to engage in that self reflection and to talk with people who have been down those paths and really understand, like, where is that intersection of like what I want my life to look like and where does career fit into that? And does it best suit my passions and my temperament? And also, is it practical? Are there going to be opportunities out there for me to pursue that? Is the road going to be really hard? And am I willing to go down that road, and deal with
right.
that hardship? I think those are important questions to ask yourself. And I found myself asking those questions at each step of the way, if that makes sense. So, like I said, not always necessary, but it definitely led me to where I am today. And there's no regrets in terms of a path getting there.
What skills, experiences, whether they're the professional or education background you have, or some of the personal stuff, just life, what do you use with current students? And let's talk about interventions with and support for older adolescents, high school kids, and then the college age kids, which I'm particularly interested in.
Sure.
Yeah, like what skills and interventions do you kind of draw on or most use? Because I could imagine like parents think of an education consultant or academic coach as like basically a glorified tutor. Like they sit
Sure.
down and like this is what we're going to study today, and that's it. Is that really just it, or is there more that you're pulling in terms of like, I mean, you have behavioral experience, you've got school psychology experience, and so I imagine you're thinking about not just the academic side of things, but the psychological side of things. When you're sitting down with someone. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. What do you draw on?
absolutely. I find myself with every student to really like sit down and really understand like what are the barriers? Like what are the barriers to this? Why is this person coming to me for support? And that support typically is looking like the student is struggling in school to meet their educational goals. Sometimes that's grade specific. Sometimes that's um, really managing their workload. Like
Mm,
they've been throughout their high school, especially with college students, I find they've been able to kind of to manage all the way through high school and they've been told, wow, you're so bright. If only you could organize things better. Or, man, you're so bright. Only if you could, spend some more time on that assignment. I think you'd do even better. And they somehow manage to get through high school and then they get to college and they're like, wow, I'm overwhelmed. Like, wow, this is way harder than I thought. The skills that, as I was managing all the way through high school, that's just not working for me anymore. And I'm finding myself very overwhelmed. I'm struggling to manage my workload. I'm struggling to make the grades that I had made in high school. I'm struggling to focus and to really like delineate my attention to the things like to prioritize. Um, that's where I find a lot of students are coming to me, or a lot of parents of students are coming to me and are like, we don't know what to do. Things were managing themselves until whatever point. So I get a lot of kiddos who are coming out of middle school into high school, and I get a lot of students who are coming out of high school into college. And many, if not all of the students I work with, have a diagnosis of ADHD or something else that's comorbid, whether that's anxiety or depression. But primarily, ADHD is the big population that I work with. And so a lot of students have been masking kind of all the way up until a point where that no longer is serving them. And so we sit down and really understand like what is impacting you the most. Is it organization? Like, are you struggling with how to prioritize your tasks? Are you struggling to utilize tools that work for you and that you can use consistently? Do we need to do some exploration in that area? Have you ever used an organizational tool? You would be surprised at how many students have never, used a calendar or a paper planner, which feels so outdated now. I don't have any students using those, but it's more like just any organizational tool outside of what school has provided for them in terms of the school's dashboard. Um, so many students have never used anything independent of that. So just really helping students understand like what does work with me, what does work with the way that I think and how I organize, and what's going to be consistent. So we kind of do some problem analysis. We like understand like what are the barriers. Again, sometimes it could be study skills. Like, have we ever learned how to study? Do we remember how you are we retaining anything we learn? Is there something going on with the way that we are practicing those skills and the repetition? And are we spacing it out enough? Like there's a little psychoeducation that goes into teaching some study skills. Sometimes it's motivation. I would say most of the time it's motivation. So we're really understanding like what is demotivating for us? Like why are we getting so, what is causing that anxiety and overwhelm? Is there anything that we can change in terms of our habits around school and managing our school life to help boost your motivation and to help you get engaged? Um, so those are kind of the avenues that we explore. It's very student-led, it's very individualized. And through that work too, sometimes we pull in, depending on the age of the student and their kind of connection to their family. Sometimes we pull in caregivers, and especially with high school students, I've pull in the school team to help communicate like what are we seeing in class? What are we seeing as barriers there? How can we work to support the student within that environment? So it's a lot of like I said, it's very individualized based on the student, but it really is like a team effort and really understanding like how are we helping support the students' growth and skill development in the environment that they're in, and what do we need to change about that environment, if anything. So that's kind of at a broad level my work, and then in the day to day, I really like meet with students once a week throughout at least the semester to work on those skills specific to whatever they're struggling with. And we will create routines within those sessions that help them build sustainable habits, and then also to help build in some accountability. And that's another piece of my work I find really important is students can really struggle with no longer having that external accountability that they had when they lived at home with their parents. So now they're in college and they're all on their own, and no one is dictating or providing that structure in terms of their schedule or when they eat, when they do sports, like organized sports. Their schedule is completely, I find freshmen are just overwhelmed with the time that they have. They're like, I don't know how to organize my time. So kind of helping them um, develop those skills as well. I think basically we work on that in a concentrated session week to week, and help them build some sustainable habits so that they can meet their goals.
I'm always, I yeah, I think always is fair. Concerned when I hear students say, "I think I have ADHD," or "I'm diagnosed with ADHD." Um, and and it's not because I don't believe in ADHD. I mean, it clearly is real.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that concerns me though, and I'd love to hear your take on this. Um, ADHD sometimes, I mean, what the research says is sometimes it is there's a neurological basis to it.
Mm-hmm.
Other times, ADHD symptoms are a byproduct of other stuff going on. I specifically think about someone I worked with last year. ADHD symptoms would have checked all the boxes if we put them in front of like testing, a
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, and we did psych testing. The problem was the stimulants that they had been put on, which is obviously the typical medication intervention, it actually
Hmm.
made things a lot worse. And it
Hmm.
created anxiety that had not really been ramped up before.
Hmm.
And we were scratching our heads. Well, we meaning like the other professionals that I had pulled in, realized that this person had some significant trauma that hadn't been disclosed.
Hmm.
And so their amygdala was firing out all this norepinephrine and cortisol, and that's pretty hard to stay focused when your brain is in hypervigilant mode. And
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
wonder because I mean there are so many kids, so many students that have either capital T trauma, like legit, like this
Hmm.
can be diagnosed, or even lowercase t trauma, where it's like just a lot of bad stuff has happened, but no
Hmm.
one's categorized it that way. Your role is not as therapist, but
Definitely not.
I could imagine that many times, like you're the first person that these kids have come in contact with. And the on ramp has been through an education on ramp or academic perspective, but you
Hmm.
might sense all this other stuff going on. I wonder how often you see something like that, like what you do with that, and how you communicate with the students, and maybe like you said, when we're talking about college students, they're over 18. Like, do you have to abide by confidentiality? Do you pull the parents in and say, "Hey, like your son's kind of jacked up academically because of this other stuff going on"? How do you handle? I guess the broader
Yeah.
question is like when you suspect that there's a mental health or a psychological or neuropsych thing going on. How do you handle that?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question and then I want to jump back to the ADHD part because I think that's interesting too. But in terms of how I manage, like if I am concerned about a you know, mental health concern overarching, like what is going on with the student and is the biggest barrier, again, you mentioned I'm not a therapist and I definitely am not. So I always refer out to professionals that would be better suited for that. So if I have a student who I feel like I'm working with and I'm really noticing like, you're exhibiting like, a lot of mental health stress, and I'm like noticing like I've definitely had students in the past who have had anxiety that is overarching everything, making it really is really impacting them on a day-to-day basis where they are not able to even participate in the classroom, to participate, to hand anything in, like really struggling with that anxiety. Depending on the age of the student and depending on like so I'll speak to that kid that I'm thinking of in particular was a high school student. I did have conversations with their parents. I always disclose to students that I work with. It is my job to be a mandated reporter. So if I'm concerned about your safety or the safety of others, I will disclose that to the proper proper people, proper channels. So that's how I handle that confidentiality piece with students. And that's whether they're an adult or not. Like I'm a mandated reporter for like if they're going to hurt themselves or others. But in terms of like if I'm working with a college student, that is when I would say, I'm wondering if academics and this academic coaching is not our first priority. Like,
Mm.
I think maybe we need to look at other mental health habits and building, some resilience and some skills and strategies in that realm. And that is not my area. So let's find somebody that can help you with that. And so that either I'll bring in a therapist to work with us in tandem, and we can continue to work toward educational goals if that feels good for the student or for the client. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the client is like, I'm really not ready to um, focus on motivation, and I'm really not ready to kind of integrate feedback and have accountability. It's making me feel awful, and I need to deal with what else is going on first. And that is totally, I totally recommend that. Sometimes students do want to work in tandem and work on both things at the same time. Kind of depends on how I feel, what will be most successful and most helpful for that client. At the high school level, I would bring in parents and we would have a conversation about how, I'm really concerned about your student and what they're experiencing. And I think, again, maybe academic goals are not our main focus and main priority right now. Really, it's about making sure that your child is safe and healthy. And so working with them to find the right resources to make sure that they're supporting their student in that area is basically how we'll spend our time and our
I
focus.
I can imagine there are some parents because I mean some of the parents I've worked with, they don't want to hear that. like like
Yeah, I think, yeah,
like home slice. Your job is to get the grades up. We don't want to hear all this like
yeah,
mumbo jumbo about like anxiety and depression and stuff.
yeah.
I can imagine that that's hard to either your spidey sense is tingling that that's the pushback you're going to get, or they explicitly say something like, "Yeah, but we still want you to focus on the academics."
Yeah, and I think those are hard conversations. I think sometimes it really, I feel like sometimes part of my job is psychoeducation around
Mm.
mental health, and I would say most.
Can you explain what psychoeducation is real quick? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it's just kind of giving background to like what certain mental health disorders could look like, how they could manifest, what interventions would be appropriate, and what we would really be concerned about and should focus on. So, for example, I do a lot of, I would say in my role, a lot of psychoeducation around ADHD,
Mm.
because again, that is primarily the diagnosis that I interact with the most. And I also find there's a large gap of knowledge with parents and families around ADHD because it's very much in popular press, right? We hear about ADHD and increasing diagnosis rates all the time. And, it feels like everyone left, right, and center is getting an ADHD diagnosis. And so I think parents have a big concern about it being overdiagnosed or is that, how, or even struggling with how to support their student who like in their eyes has seemed really capable and they've not had such grave concerns until a certain point and now um, ADHD symptoms are really impacting their child and they're really unsure of how to approach it and how to support in a way that is helpful for their student. So I think a lot of psychoeducation we do is around what does symptomology look like, how can it manifest, what the experience for their child might be and how can we be understanding of that, how can we meet the child where they are and really live in that experience a little bit so that we can support them the best way we can. I think oftentimes when we're uncomfortable with something we have a tendency to be like, ooh, I don't know, I don't want to touch it. you know I don't know, I think you got to deal with it kind of thing. And we just don't have that luxury as parents. Like with our kids, it's our job to really to be there for them and to support them in any way we can, and to learn too when we encounter something that is uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and new. It's our job to educate ourselves about what that is and how we can really meet our child where they're at. So I find a lot of times working with parents around understanding that some of the behaviors they see, some of the frustrations they have, are really to normalize that for them. Like some of these things that you're seeing and experiencing are really sometimes they're developmentally appropriate. Sometimes this is what having a teenager can be. And sometimes this is what having a teenager who has ADHD symptoms can be. And so helping them kind of understand that and normalize that for them, I think can be empowering and help them move forward with their child in a different way and kind of at a new level. So that's psychoeducation in a nutshell.
I like it. And something that just struck me as you were talking about that. I think there are lots of people in education, whether it's like in academia or in educational consulting or academic coaching, that don't have the the mental health background, the psychological background. And it strikes me that it's so essential because learning is not just it's not siloed. It's not just this kind of like this silo where information goes in, it gets processed, and then gets put in the right file. There's always a psychological component to it and neurological component. And so having that background with psychology and behavioral analysis just is so helpful, I could imagine. you know,
I
um,
hope, yeah, I think so.
even if you're not even if you're not wearing the hat of a psychologist in that moment, looking through the lens of mental health and psychology, like, okay, what am I seeing and what's the function to this behavior? And
Yeah,
yeah, it seems like almost maybe part of your secret sauce.
maybe. Yeah, I think it's so helpful in terms of really understanding a problem at a deeper level and providing, I think, um, kind of a nuanced like approach. I don't think there's any one solution to one problem. I think it's not
Mm,
A plus B equals C. People are much more complicated than that. And I think developing adolescents are especially more complicated than that. And so I think that there are multiple ways to approach a presenting problem. And so really understanding how all these things like a student's environment, their history, their past traumas, their family dynamics, their educational history, their understanding of themselves, like all of those things come together to combine what this student's life is. And to ignore all of that, I think, is to do a disservice to them and to their family in terms of moving toward educational goals, if that is the priority for them. Like you mentioned earlier, you asked if like in terms of if I'm a tutor, or like I get that a lot, right? With parents being like, all right, so are you going to tutor get in this specific subject? And I would just want to be clear that the work that we do is much more in depth and also like not content specific. I am not, a math whiz. I am not a history buff. Like I am not somebody who can sit with your kid and work at a content level, like you said, just kind of presenting information for them to retain and then to kind of move forward with. It's really an in-depth kind of process in which we're coaching and working with the student to self-actualize. I mean, that's really what we're asking like adolescents to do, especially in the college years, is to become, self-actualized and effective in their own lives. And I feel like that's the job of coaching, is to help support that process. And that process is complicated and full of barriers and things to work through. And yeah.
uh, what changes have you noticed? I'm getting back to some of my questions here
Yeah, sure.
because I keep deviating. What changes have you noticed over the years? And it might be the last 3 years,
Hmm.
but specifically around like older adolescents, young adult. Like, have you noticed? Like you commented on, increased rates of ADHD. Are you noticing
Hmm.
like more academic problems are, and it doesn't just have to be within the individual. It could also be at the systematic level. Are you noticing like less communication with the university staff, faculty? Are parents slightly different than they used to be a few years ago? Yeah. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, in terms of trends, I I was thinking about this um question, and I think it's important to acknowledge I've been in the field of education as a professional for 10 years, the last three being a coach. And I think over that time, I have noticed two things that I am kind of concerned about in terms of changing trends. The first is I think I've noticed parents being extremely involved in the academic lives of their children. Um, I mean, I think, and that has shifted, I think, over the last, I would say, generation, maybe more than a decade, but I've really seen that ramp up, especially with college students and high school to college students. I feel there is a anxiety that I deal with parents in terms of their worry of their children's academic success and future prospects. And I think that has really been a result of the changing kind of landscape of just our society and country, and things that are just this worry of kind of scarcity in terms of
Hmm.
what is my kid, if they don't graduate high school, go to college, get a 4-year degree, go to grad school, get a graduate degree, they're not going to have a job and they're going to live at my house until they're 25 plus. And that's a reality for a lot of people. And also, I think a huge anxiety that parents have. And it's resulting in, I think, a huge need to intervene and to kind of advocate on behalf of their student in a way that I have not seen previously. I think the level of involvement kind of goes up to a point where parents are turning in their students' homework. They're driving to school to hand in that, forgotten piece of paper. Um, they're emailing teachers consistently, daily about their students', progress and wanting grade updates. I think even the proliferation of technology is a wonderful thing. But one thing that has really changed, I think, is access to like updated information on grades and progress and performance. Parents in real time have an app they can click and say, "Oh, my kid got you know got a C on this assignment today in bio." They can see in real time because it's graded. Everything is electronic now, so it's such immediate real time feedback that I think has led parents to be anxious about those daily updates. And then that I think transfers to their kiddos. And I think too has made it difficult for students to be autonomous in their own school life, to advocate for themselves with teachers and with administrators, even. I've had parents ask me to email advisors on behalf of their students. It's like, no, we're going to work with your kiddo to learn how to do that because we want them to be able to advocate for themselves. So that has been a huge trend that I've seen. And I want to be fair to parents. I think we're all doing our best out here. It's a rapidly changing landscape that our kids are going into, and it's really different than what we experienced. I think technology and where we're at is just it's so different, and I think it's scary for a lot of us. So I want to be fair to that anxiety felt, but I also just want to encourage parents to let their kiddo struggle a little and to be, to fly free a bit.
I think also to piggyback on that, I think there's a generation of parents that have unaddressed issues of their own that manifest. And I don't think everyone has mommy and daddy issues, but man, it's amazing how college students seem to they don't even realize how they're being parented as defined by stuff that mom and dad are bringing into that parent-child relationship. Um, and there's a power differential, so it seems like, well, this is just the way it is. Like that's, parents and then college student, and they're shooting on me. They're telling me what I should be doing, and they know better than I do. And I think a lot of the time those parents like might have some stuff going on unaddressed. Lots of like substance use stuff that I see in parents. Lots of substance use, almost to the point where more and more students, I think, are drinking less than their parents. In
Yeah, that's been a
in
trend with, this
many
recent generation
instances,
of Gen
yeah.
Zs. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I
I
think,
also. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to piggyback off of that. I think parents bringing in their own, I want to say, expectation. I think without knowingly doing so sometimes. Um, they're either whether they're trying to encourage their child to model from them or to people they look up to or to like whatever ideal that it is. I, for any parent listening, it's like even if your adolescent seems to shrug it off, to seem like they don't care, to seem like they're even pushing back against it, they really care what you think. They really, like, to the deepest level, really care what you think. And it affects so many aspects of their, I would say, college life, their high school and college career and trajectories. And I think that is something that I think parents don't realize a lot of the time is that you should do this, you should do that. They think it gets brushed off, or they think that their kid is just not listening, or, you know, um, falling through. And I think that really creates a lot of discord and frustration with parents and children and their dynamic. And I just wish parents could hear that their kids really care. And they tell other people, not the parent, that they really care what their parents think.
I often tell parents, sometimes they'll ask, when does it get better? Um,
Yes, I get that a lot too.
and what I tell them is like, oh, you're going to get a phone call when your kiddo's in their 30s. You're going to get a phone call and it's going to be a non sequitur. It's going to be out of nowhere. And they're going to say, Mom, Dad, like, I was a shit. I am so sorry. um, and what I tell parents, like, we are our brains and we are going through these developmental stages. And again, these kids look like adults, they smell like adults, they sound like adults, but they don't allow information in because there is a power struggle going on, and it they don't even it's not intentional, and it's very difficult for students to give their parents, gratitude, and acknowledgement that like, oh, maybe you know what you're talking about because you've been on the earth longer than me.
Oh my gosh, so many parents just want to hear that. I can't
Yes,
tell you
yeah.
how many of the parents just want to be like, I just want to hear that my kid hears me.
But Margo, the funny thing is when we ask parents like, when did you say sorry to your parents?
Hmm.
Every single parent I ask, they're like, "Oh, oh yeah, you're
So
right.
I'm
Actually,
still
you're
working on that actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
actually you're right. Like
Yeah.
um, I I was a turd to my parents, and then when I turned 30, I started realizing like, oh, I was not the nicest person to those people.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's developmental. I think I
right.
talk about that all the time, having developmentally appropriate expectations for your child, because I think it's a really challenging time in development. But it's that self-actualizing, like, developing my own path, and just the anxiety of letting that go unfettered and without intervention on the part of the parent, I think is really hard to cope with. Um,
It's frightening. It's frightening
yeah.
to um, let control go. There's a fantastic book by Nassim Taleb, called Anti-Fragile that I reference, and he writes about macroeconomic systems. But I've pulled a lot of that, into family systems and individuals, the individual. And the goal is not to build a resilient kid, it's to build an anti-fragile kid. A resilient kid is a brick wall, whereas an anti-fragile kid is a tree that gets stronger, through adversity, storms and wind and snow. That's a stronger person that's out in the world, and parents are insulating their kids from all of those variables, which means that they're not gaining strength. They're basically, stuck. And then
Yeah,
we expect them to go into the workforce and have adaptability and be able to make friends and play nicely with others and do a good job, and they just do not have the skills for that. So,
totally. Yeah,
Margo, I want
absolutely.
to move away from parents.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to get your thoughts on like kind of institutional level. We talked about like, oh, what you wish like kind of parents knew and stuff like that.
Hmm.
What do you wish like mental health providers knew or did differently, and universities, and kind of some of the professional side of, kind of academia and mental health, since you're kind of in this crossroads, so to speak, in many ways.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely an ancillary person in all of these kind of systems. Yeah, I would say to those, I will speak broadly probably to education professionals, because I think that can include therapists, that can include academic advisors, that can include anyone, professors, teachers. I would wish that they had a understanding of development and developmentally appropriate expectations for their students. I think what I find sometimes in working with students is that there is a real mismatch between the expectations that we hold of them at certain ages. Like, we say, okay, you're in college, you're 18, you are now fully independent, and expect no support. Like, this is now your job. And I think while I understand where that comes from, I think that's historically been 18 as a marker of adulthood. I don't think that matches with development and where students are finding themselves, especially now, as we said, having maybe fewer and fewer experiences of adversity and navigating, the world on their own, really when they turn 18 and go to college is the first time. And I see college as a training ground. Like, this is where we're practicing those skills. This is where we're taking some risks. This is where we're failing a bit, and then figuring out, well, that didn't work. Where can I pivot next? And that's, I think, a great time developmentally to work on building flexibility. And unfortunately, I think sometimes our expectations at that level feel so high stakes and so rigid that students have an overwhelming anxiety to try and then fail. And so I really wish that there was a better understanding of where students are developmentally, and to provide that kind of trial and error built in so that things, they are high stakes. Getting a college degree is high stakes, but there is flexibility within that to explore and to figure out like what really is fitting of your temperament and your strengths and what you are not good at. I think there needs to be more conversation around that, and more grace maybe around making mistakes, doing things that are very impulsive, like, and also practicing, like, having students come into contact with natural consequences. So just having college be this place where we're learning how to be adults instead of expecting them to already be fully formed. That would be my wish. And I think too, in that process, really focusing on relationships with students and rapport building. I think one thing I have come to find out in terms of when working with college students is sometimes I am the only adult that they see regularly, that they have lengthy conversations with about where they're at in their life and what's going on. They are not yet connected with somebody at the university where they have that relationship with. And I think, academic advisors could be that role, or there could be a professor that would fill that role. And I think students find that eventually, but just having that be a concerted effort at the outset so that students are connected to their, institution, I think would be really helpful. Just kind
That
of
is
working
such
with
a
those
good
kids.
point. That's such a good point. I had not thought about that before. That the adult touch point, um, for so many students. Yeah. Um, so I wonder, like, do you think that orientation should be more robust? Do you think that kind of the beginning, like freshman year, should look different? And also, along with that, when's the sweet spot for choosing a major, do you think? Because what you're talking about is a lot of exploration, a lot of like sandbox activity. I can imagine like parents, but also universities, they're like, let's move this along. like
Totally.
oh, you
Yeah.
want to be a journalism major? Okay, probably not gonna be employed, but at least you'll graduate. So
Right. I think that speaks to like what is everybody's motivation and long-term goal, right? So universities want you to graduate. That's great. I think that's a great goal. I think students they want to graduate, but they also want to graduate with something that is practical and going to work toward their longer term goals, even post, college. So I think just kind of understanding where everybody's oriented and operating with like, what are we prioritizing based on your long-term goals? So for students, I would say having that freshman year to explore and really like sandbox, as you put it, would be great. And by the end of freshman year, really narrowing your focus, so that especially in non-liberal colleges where it's a little bit more like you need to decide. I think having a narrower focus that at the end of your first year is a good place to land and a good goal to have. I think it's really about going through that process with a long-term goal in mind, that you are narrowing your focus and having done a lot of self-reflection and a lot of also reaching out to mentors, reaching out to people in the field, like exploring different opportunities, what they look like, doing the bulk of that work conscientiously in that first year to year and a half, I think is where I would want to land in terms of narrowing your focus. And then your other question about orientation and those kind of supports built in, I don't want to speak too much on that because I've never worked within higher education, so I can't comment on like the kind of nuts and bolts of how things are organized. I just think broadly speaking, having more positive adults in adolescents' lives is a good thing. Having positive role models and people that they can call mentors, I think is a good thing. So any way that we can increase the opportunities for that, to draw students out of kind of this isolation that I think so marks that freshman year, I think would be a really positive effort. So I work mostly with college freshmen because I think they're coming into college and they're like, whoa, expectations are different. I'm alone. And there is an intense period of isolation while they are figuring out what their new social groups look like. I think that's why Greek life is so popular. It's like kind of a built-in foundation in that way. But they're figuring out social circles, they're figuring out academic expectations, and they're trying to decide what they want to do for the next 3.5 years. So I think that's a lot of pressure to develop rapidly in isolation. And so anything we could do to support that process with positive adult interaction, I think is a win.
We got to wrap up soon. I've kept you
Okay.
for so long, and I really appreciate it. I would love to hear what you're reading, blog posts, books, YouTube.
Yes.
Yeah, what are you taking in right now, and professionally, personally, yeah, what's interesting you?
Yeah, so I'm a parent of a 1-year-old baby girl. And so I actually spend most of my days with her primarily. And I work very part-time at this moment in our lives, which to hark back to our like, how do you want your job to look flexible and autonomous were important to me for that reason. So yeah, I'm lucky enough to spend a lot of my time with her. And as a result, consume a lot of parenting content and podcasts. So I am really loving, I love Emily Oster. I love anything that she does. She's an economist that talks on parenting topics and really just collates a ton of data to answer common parenting kind of questions. She started in pregnancy and then has kind of expanded um, it's called Parent Data, is her kind of platform. And she just released a new podcast called Raising Parents. And it kind of it speaks to current parenting topics and concerns. And it's just really done very well, in my opinion. She grabs, experts from differing viewpoints to kind of talk on the same topic. And I just think it's really interesting and fascinating. So I'm listening to that routinely every week at least. And I also just started a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It's about kind of the role of social media and smartphone use. I find that really compelling, and I would recommend that to parents. And one text that I always use for clients and parents of clients that I work with is called Smart But Scattered. I have it here. This is my Smart But Scattered Teens. There's also a child version for younger kiddos by Peg Dawson and Richard Greer. And it's just a really like brass tacks, here are some strategies you can start working with your kiddo at home to help work through some common struggles you might be having with your teenager at home. So I highly recommend that book as well.
Great. I will post all of that information and any resource that we've talked about in the show notes, and make sure that people
Great.
can easily find that stuff. Um, how can people reach you? Do you want people to reach you? Yeah, you got a 1-year-old running
Yeah,
around,
yeah.
but
Yes, I do. I am looking to work with some college students in the spring. So if people are interested in working with me, I'm open to that. And you can find me at my website. It's shineeduconsulting.com. Um, and you can contact me there. You can also just Google my name and that will come up, Margo Shine. And yeah, there's contact form there. It talks a little bit about what I do and how to reach me. So that's where to find me.
perfect. I will also post all that information wherever this lands.
Great.
YouTube
Thank
world
you.
and blog and all that good stuff.
Sounds
So,
great.
Margo, thank you so much for talking with me today and all the great information. And good luck with the 1-year-old. And
Thank you so much.
all
I
right.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Before you head off, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in today. All of the resources discussed are in the show notes below. And one last thing, if you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please forward it along to them. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to my podcast, the YouTube channel, and the newsletter. All right, see you all next time.